Welcome to episode 211 by Thrive from Additive-Free Lifestyle. I'm Tracey, and together with my sister Jo, we're the hosts of this podcast show. Thrive is a podcast show to help you lower your toxic load and give you permission to seek questions and ask advice on topics you may not yet understand. So this is a two-part episode that we are going into today. If you haven't not listened to the episode we recorded with Flourishing Bodies from last week, then please go back and listen to that from the start. It was super interesting. We have a lot of laughs and a lot of fun on that episode. So this is the second part of that episode. So we will dive straight into this and finish off our conversation.
Well, I think, we talk about this a lot with in our course around the extrusion and where they change foods, and obviously, again, that genetically modified food. But because we're talking specifically about MSG and processed foods, well, you guys are the living experts in this. I mean, you've really lived and experienced the effects of MSG, and Jo very much so with her daughter would see some of the side effects of that. But ultimately, MSG is put into foods to make foods taste way more desirable. And then, of course, you want more of that food. Like, it's really salty and the texture is amazing and it's delicious. But it's also highly addictive, and especially in our kids, it really excites their nervous system. It literally affects their whole body. They have a whole body experience with it. And then as they come down from that experience, as we all know, we've been there at some point, is the huge tantrum following it. So the only way we can get them to get through that tantrum is to give them more MSG. But there are so many studies that have actually really revealed its toxicity. I mean, we're talking side effects of migraines, fatigue, headaches, dizziness, asthma, heart palpitations. I mean, can you imagine in our little ones when they're first starting out to eat that they're experiencing either one or all of these things, and more so they actually can't articulate it apart from through their behavior. So for me, it's definitely one that I'm looking for when patients are coming into my clinic with children with behavioral issues, concentration, sleep disorders, or whole body eczema, that type of thing. I'm looking, are they eating rice crackers? If so, what brand are they? It's really nailing how much of that MSG is actually within their diet.
It's such a big one, isn't it? And I know, and look, we'll go back to another adult story, but my daughter, her boyfriend moved in with us a few years ago, and now they've bought their own home. But when he moved in, riddled with eczema, and living with us, he obviously made a lot of lifestyle changes in my house. You can't have that. He'd come to me and be like, what's this one? What's in this one, Trace? And I'm like, do you really want to know what's in it, Sam? He's like, Mom, no. I didn't want to eat it anyway. Yeah. But his eczema pretty much cleared up. And now that they've bought their own home and they're living, their lifestyle again, his eczema's flared right back up again. And I'm trying to have those conversations again to say, what are we doing? What are you doing? And not to put a badness on things, because I think that's really important discussion too. Like, we don't want to label things as bad and toxic, and something's toxic, but but you get the idea what I'm saying. Because, we don't want to create a bad relationship with food. And everything is in moderation. There's still times that I will go and have a meat pie at the football. Whatever, right? So but when it's a day to day and they're not understanding how much that they're eating, especially in our baby food, and MSG in baby food, and it's not going to be labeled as MSG. It's going to be labeled as something totally different. You won't recognize as an MSG or as a flavor enhancer, and yet it's in there. And I saw something the other day that said it's only people with a sensitivity to it that need to be concerned. And my immediate question was, how do we know if we have a sensitivity to it if it's in nearly everything we eat?
That's right. Yeah.
From a baby.
Can guarantee most people will have a sensitiveness to it. Yeah.
But there's a threshold, right? You're just constantly topping up the threshold. So I get what you're saying, Trace, because it's like, okay, well, they've never, particularly if you're going fully purchased baby foods, they never actually know the difference between their child on MSG or off MSG. And so it's that real, so it's a bit like when you're He's not your son-in-law yet, is he? He's just your
not yet.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
One day
You know,
soon.
it's not that, you know, we're not saying that, you know, sensitive or not. What people have to be mindful of is the recognition of how is that affecting my little one, and it can be as simple as, you know, they have something in it and then they throw a tantrum because they want another one. Now you might go, oh well, they really love that and they're hungry and they just want more, but that's possibly not the cause either. So it's just really tuning into what happens when my child eats this. And then you can only really gauge that is what happens when my child doesn't eat this. What's the control system for me to understand the effects of MSG in my baby's diet and out of my baby's diet? And it's a bit like yours and Joe's journey. You know, it's not until you rip it out, you go, wow.
That's right.
All that was resolvable.
And the other thing too, then I guess if we're going to sort of somewhat label foods, if it is that it's only a sometimes food or an occasional or what have you, it's far more obvious as well. It's like, wow, he's explosive this afternoon. Wait, we went to the footy and we had that delicious meat pie with tomato sauce. So, you know, you wear it. That's the choice that you made and that's so be it. But it's far more obvious when it's only an occasional food, which I think is the most important thing. You're allowed to.
I've got a top example of that because my husband is a twisty maniac.
I knew you were going to say that.
So if he's and by virtue of passing down food legacies, I've got 3 boys that are twisty maniacs as well. The thing I notice is when they consume them, which is very rarely, but when they consume them, they start coughing immediately upon consumption. And at no other time do they have those irritations. And then they go crazy in behavior. I can see it. And, you know, it's only because I know that they have them in pockets that those behaviors are so observable.
Yeah, it's so true. It's absolutely true. What I was going to say is, what is wrong with my brain today? I'm blaming perimenopause, right?
You can, because it's legitimate.
We can talk about that later as well if you like.
We are running out of time. But with MSG, so there's a natural MSG. We know it's in tomatoes. Our own body makes a glutamate, right? We need glutamates in our diet, and we have these natural glutamates. So for the naysayer that rolls their eyes and's like, and we get this on our social media. So this is why I'm asking this question. But glutamates are in tomatoes, and what are you going to cut it? What do you say to those people that are that it's okay? MSG is fine because it's in a tomato.
Yeah. Well, truthfully, this I think what that comes down to for that individual or an individual who might be reacting to a tomato is because the very biochemical processes where our body has to process that glutamate. So in small levels of natural glutamates, that may be fine. It's the same with sulfites. It's the same with salicylates. They occur in every sort of natural food. We cannot avoid them, right? But it's someone or certainly a small person might actually have an issue with processing that particular amount of glutamate or an overconsumption of glutamate. It doesn't then, glutamate needs to travel down. It's the precursor to glutamine, and glutamine is a really nice calming amino acid. So it really kind of supports our GABA pathways, which is that really nice calming neurotransmitter, I should say. And glutamine is also really healing to the gut. So for some people, and especially in little people, I definitely see often that glutamate can actually travel down the inappropriate pathway and not make glutamine. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's more excitatory rather than inhibitory. So they cannot tolerate it. And I see that often, even if I am, and vice versa, glutamine can also go down the glutamate pathway and be the opposite. So it's more around that individual's tolerance level.
But and it's also about a natural versus a fake.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, that there's a really big difference there. So we're designed, you know, so while some may even have sensitivity issues with that natural conversion.
That's right.
The reality is that natural conversion, whilst might sit okay with the majority of the population, the fake addition has a very different reaction. You know, it's all chemically made and it's all, you know, I think
and in terms of the way it's the amount we're getting as well, like you said earlier, like it's I know for my kids, they probably didn't have any. They would have had Vegemite at breakfast. And so we know yeast extract is in Vegemite. They would have had some type of, if I'm talking school age, they would have definitely had some type of cracker with it in it, like a barbecue shape or something, although I think it's been removed from those now, but I haven't looked at those in years. Definitely gravy on our dinner at night. So, they were having these 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 touches of MSG, and imagine it. And then if you go and buy, and then if they ever did eat a 2-minute noodle, there's about 5 million versions of MSG in that. And then, meant to get through their dancing for 3 hours trying to focus with the MSG overload. And then, maybe we've bought a roast chicken on the way home from the supermarket, which has another 5 or 6 versions of MSG in it last time I looked. So, and then I'd make gravy out of a tin, right? So, but, so as a family, we were consuming it all day long. Yeah. I might have had Vegemite and cracker. I used to take Vegemite and crackers for work for morning tea. All day long, we would consume MSG and have no glutamates in a form.
Yes.
So not necessarily MSG in its powdered form, but as a glutamate in its way. And so, I can see that level, that tolerance, if from a baby having it in their food, and then I would add gravy onto their mashed potato.
Yum.
Here's a little dose, sweetheart.
Anyway, we don't know any better until we know better.
No,
right?
that's right.
That's right. Yeah, that's our philosophy also.
Yeah. How do we know if it's just more than that typical fussy eating? So if you haven't listened to episode 1 of this, please go back and listen to last week's episode. And so you understand exactly why we're following on and why this is the follow-on question. So, who's going to answer? Carmen, I think.
I'll jump in. I think, how do we know it's more than fussy eating? Well, fussy eating can, as we sort of spoke about in the last episode, can come about for, many elements and many reasons. But certainly as a clinician, what I'm trying to help parents identify if there is a bigger issue, and especially it is hard to sort of identify these things when we're first starting, but the starting point can be what leads them to the fussy eating down the track, if that makes sense. So for example, if there's some structural issues from a particularly oral motor development, there may well be some issues with the baby being able to chew the food and swallow the food and eat the food, for example. So these structural issues can appear as though they're not interested in the food, but they're in fact not so. We need to identify by looking for things that are quite specific. So we're talking repetitive gagging. We all know that when a baby is starting out with feeding, whether it's puree or self-feeding, physiologically, we do need to test that gagging reflex. Like that's actually a protective mechanism to teach a child to not choke. That's kind of a natural protection thing. But if it's constant and that repetitive gag or that gag reflex doesn't desensitize or switch off after about sort of the 9-month mark is what we're looking at, that can be a very big structural issue. And similarly, they may have problems with swallowing. So think about it, if in those instances where we're feeling uncomfortable and we're constantly gagging, and maybe even we've got some gastrointestinal issues, so the foods that we're eating are causing us some upset or causing the baby some upset after they've eaten, that's an experience that is now essentially imprinted in their mind. So they become a little bit more aware, certainly as they get older. That's the first imprint in their mind about eating. So they become a little bit more sensitive to it or afraid. So I think to get these assessed early on, if you notice them, is really, really pertinent to trying to avoid those tendencies down the track.
Okay.
Things such as tongue tie is a really big one, and lip tie. Now, I can definitely see and do see that these things can go unnoticed for a really long time. And this is actually part of an assessment, even in early childhood, when you are having your baby assessed with a early childhood nurse practitioner. I can't tell you the amount of times that this thing isn't detected or tongue tie isn't detected. So, even well past the age of 2, I've seen children that have a tongue tie. So again, that's something where where we realize this is not a fussy eating issue. This is that they've been having problems with actually eating, technically.
Can I just add in there? I think it's really important to seek the right consultant, and I'm sure you'll mention some of our favorites. And that's simply because I was unable to breastfeed any 3 of my boys and was hospitalized and breast surgery and had, serious difficulties. And I asked and got the boys assessed from a lactation consultant for tongue tie, to which the lactation consultant said they don't have them. I'm now at 13, 11 and 8, and they're seeing a chiropractor who says, wow, your boys have massive tongue tie.
Wow.
And that's time I can't get back. But you have to really see the right specialist when there's structural issues involved. And there's some really great ones out there.
Yeah. So we are seeking, a feeding clinic, which you can go through the public system to do that. I certainly did that. I was really conscious of wondering whether or not my son had some issues, some developmental issues. So I had him assessed in the feeding clinic through the public system, which included a psychologist, an occupational therapist, and a speech pathology. Right. And I can't tell you how reassuring that was for me in the very beginning that, okay, actually everything is fine, or B, it's not. And then I was able to rectify. So occupational therapists, speech pathologists, and even cranial sacral therapists, I'm going to say, because if there has been somewhat of a trauma through their birthing experience, there can actually be a bit of an attachment to that with their structural issues, which then affects their feeding behavior. Then I think we really need to consider the sensory issues here. We need to take into consideration that, again, these sensory issues are often undiagnosed or more so, and they're really big for a little person. Like, these things are huge, and they're not formally or rarely diagnosed before the age of 2 again. So this whole time when we're first starting out solids, they can be really struggling. So some of the things that you might notice your child, or what we need to be looking out for, is they might literally only have, like we were saying in the last episode, the chicken nuggets on their repertoire. They might only have 3 or 4 foods that they favor. More so when they're dropping foods is a huge concern, and not picking up any new foods. Okay. Then we know that there is potentially a really big issue. So they might also have really strong aversions to food. So, they gravitate or move away from certain textures, colors, or smells. And this really comes from their sensory input and sensory overload. So I think in the last episode, I was kind of talking about offering safe foods for first starting off as a strategy. Do we have a fussy eater or a picky eater or a problem feeder? So that's what we need to identify here. My child cannot stand the smell of an avocado. My child cannot, he or she seems to be really upset by that food being anywhere near them. If they're happy to have the food on their plate, but not necessarily engage in it, that's not this is something that needs to be sort of considered and assessed.
And I've got a little one that he's not a fussy eater, he's a sensory eater. So rice just gives him just that whole gag. He just can't stand the sight of it, the touch of it, the trying down the throat. And it's just, you just kind of go, it's rice, but it's just a sensory thing. Yeah. And it's really important if your kids have sensory issues, it's about that conversation. What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What is it, so you can understand what are the sensory issues before a formal diagnosis, because maybe they don't like the texture, maybe it is the smell, maybe it's the color, so it's really important. The more you talk about it, is you begin to understand where those sensory difficulties kind of originate.
Because we all have food we don't like, right? Like I don't like coffee. Like I can't stand the smell of it. I can't drink it. I'm one of those people, but I love a good cup of tea. So, but we all have our things that we dislike. So that doesn't mean I'm fussy. It just means that there's things I don't like.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think pregnant, oh my God, do not even go near me with a coffee when I was pregnant. I would have probably tipped it on your head. Anyway,
but I guess that's the thing. It really is about, you as a parent, you have great intuition, really, ultimately. So I think, it's not that, he doesn't like that food and so be it. Like, fair enough. But it's when you really start to notice the patterns and there's that strong aversion to it. And and just knowing, like I said, particularly around it, there's a problem feeder when I think the most important thing to notice is when they're dropping foods and not picking up any new foods. So, it's one thing, my son, I remember he would never touch a tomato. And then I did that snack eating. I gave him a punnet of tomatoes while I was doing the shopping just to hold on to. I didn't actually expect that he was going to eat the whole punnet. He ate the whole punnet of tomatoes, hasn't touched a tomato ever since. But, that was it. That's all it's about. The rest of his feeding sort of became well. So we know that there wasn't a problem feeding there. Yeah, that's not an issue. Yeah. And then lastly, I think I'll touch on nutrients is a huge thing or nutrient deficiencies, of course, because I'm a nutritionist. Is a huge one when we know that it's bigger than fussy eating. They may well be really deficient in some of those critical nutrients from the get-go, and they can actually be the cause of underlying picky eating or problem feeding. So we might be witnessing in our children really low appetite or not engaging in eating whatsoever. Again, some of those digestive issues, they might have some gut issues that's creating a lot of discomfort for them, and then again they have that sort of attachment to that. So we need to fix that if I can speak, that gut issue. Maybe they're too tired. If they're iron deficient, they're not interested in eating. It's an event. It's something that they have to put energy or effort into. Their body alone has to put energy into processing that meal or that food. So all of these types of things, and I think especially the two that come to mind for me, because they do happen from the very early on or can happen from the very early on, is deficiencies in iron and zinc. They are both crucial nutrients for developing that eating style and that interest in food as well.
And what would be a couple of things that are great in irons and zinc that we could feed our children, our babies, toddlers, what
are some of the best sources?
Yeah.
Well, red meat, red meat is actually really obviously a very absorbable form of iron. And people can be confronted thinking, oh, my baby can't have red meat at 6 months. Well, actually they can have it pretty early on. It's just about the way you serve it, and it needs to be your number one food. I know people tend to go, that's why people go for baby rice cereal, because it's fortified with iron. We can't stress iron enough from the minute you begin solids, and that's simply because the stores, they've got no stores left basically, so they really need it and has a huge impact. So red meat's really important. Spirulina, actually, I'll mention that because if you've got any vegetarians listening, then spirulina is very high in iron that is able to be added into foods, and it's about making sure you've got the combos right with iron. So any vitamin C source will help that absorbable component of iron really be on the uptake very early on.
And there's a lot of zinc in red meat as well.
Yeah. Okay, so red meat's
a good place to start.
And bone broth.
Bone broth. I was going to say liver initially, but I just wasn't sure where that would sit with some of your listeners. But truly speaking, it is an unbelievable source of nutrients from the get-go. That's a whole other conversation, but it's worth being open to.
What about things like an oyster powder, or mushroom powders and things like that, like sprinkling little things like that onto baby foods and stuff, just to give them that little boost?
Well, if we know that it's from a reliable, reputable source and doesn't have anything else, I mean, we're all just, as you know, we're always looking at the ingredients. So superfoods in general, we're definitely open to and think are a great option, especially with vitamin C as well. Like there's some beautiful natural superfoods for vitamin C, camu, for example, or goo binge powder, 100%. If there's a place for it, we're not opposed to it. It's just a matter of the sourcing.
Yeah.
And also potential allergic reactions. Potential allergies. Yeah.
And we'll just wrap this up because we're meant to be doing a shorty episode.
Sorry.
How would we know if my child was deficient? Like, would a blood test? And what would I ask for in a doctor? Like, what would I go to and say? Without them rolling their eyes at me thinking I'm crazy.
Well, I think being your child's advocate and champion, that's for sure. Like sometimes it is actually not leaving the office until you get the referral or find a new doctor, saying, I think my child has an issue. I really need some help. Can we do a simple blood test, because they absolutely can from 6 months, years of age. We'll be looking for your ferritin stores. Zinc is easy to trace in your serum. Like it is a matter for some of these basic nutrients of a simple blood test that a doctor should happily refer you for.
Can I caution though, extracting blood from a little one is really difficult, and it's not a nice process for baby, and it's not a great process for mum or dad. So see a professional that can help you identify other signs as well. So things like, dark under the eyes, white finger spots on the white spots on the fingernails. Naturopathically, if your baby, I think, is before that real blood test withdrawal stage, is I would be looking for those signs, because it's not, and also the interpretation of blood test results kind of sit differently with natural and Eastern and Western medicine. So I think it's really about, there's a whole lot of other behaviors and tendencies and signs and symptoms that sit well beyond just a blood test. I wouldn't want to put my little one through that straight away, for sure.
Good point. I love that. Thank you. Anything else just to finish it off really quickly that you want to share?
Oh,
Carmen?
we would talk for hours, to be honest, Trace. So no, I think there's a lot in there for your listeners. I think at the end of the day, like I said, it's about being a champion for your child and seeking help, because there's plenty out there.
I love what you said about the mother's intuition. And I think and I've spoken about this on past podcast episodes, as women specifically, we've been a little bit pushed down. There's a little bit like you get the eye rolls at you at a doctor, or you get another mum might say something, or, there's this judgment sort of happening out there. And we stop being that advocate, because we get that pushback. So I really encourage you to really touch into that woman's side of our bodies, because we know stuff, and we know our children better than any other person on the 100%. Planet. So if you do have an issue, or you think there's an issue, you're not being a hypochondriac. You're not being just this scared brand new mum. If you know and there's a change and you can see something 1 million times, please go and seek the right person, like you've said, and really encourage you to do that, because I'm a big advocate for that.
I just got goosebumps you saying that, because I totally believe it and feel it as well. I agree with you. Yeah.
And I think the only other thing I would say early in terms of this fussy eating or picky eating or anything that's happening is, yes, intuition is so strong, and no one knows your baby better than you. But start early, start your strategies early. You can have real tangible impact in that first 3 years of your baby's life in terms of their future health outcomes. It sits right in the pocket, be it gut health, immune health, healthy food relationships. I mean, that it starts with you in the kitchen, as you say in part one, Trace. You're cooking apple on the stove and they're smelling it. There's a big difference between that early environment and the one where you go and pick up a pouch from the store. So I think really start early, and know that all those little things can be really big things in your little one's food journey. And if you bring in lots of good little ones, then it sets them up really nicely. And psychology and play are really big around food. So it's not just the nutrition component, it's about the fun of food.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. That's a beautiful way to wrap it up. So we'll finish it there.
Thank you.
Thank you again, ladies, for joining. And we'll share all of this over on our show notes and in our podcast show. So at Flourishing Bodies on Instagram and Facebook.
Yep.
Instagram
and website.
Facebook,
and even TikTok.
Whoa. Yeah, and even TikTok. We tried the TikTok thing and we were like, we're no good at it. So at Flourishing Bodies on all the platforms.
Yeah. And, thank you.
And we'll tag you in. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks,
Trace.
Bye. Bye.